Tonight we're going to have a special treat. Some time ago, I picked up a book, Ham Radio DX. I guarantee you'll find some ideas that you probably hadn't thought of.
Yeah, my name is Lucas, W6AER. So currently 310 entities, 8-band DXCC, 9-band WAS, which doesn't sound crazy, but I am on a very small lot. We were joking about that earlier, and I'm not kidding. It's 48 feet across and maybe about twice the length in the back. So I literally have more antennas than trees. Okay, so the topics I'm going to go over a little bit in the book is basically WSJTX. I figured everyone's on FT8. I know there's some mixed opinions about FT8, and some people think it's the work of the devil. I think it's where everybody is now. Um, and there are some things that I tweak on WSJTX and especially in the waterfall. And this is all covered in the book. I am also going to talk a little bit about some add-ons that I find helpful and some alternatives and whether they're better or not. I actually did some testing on whether some of these things are better or not. And Ferrites, which is probably that's some people think they're voodoo, others don't. I actually think they really help me. But I'll kind of give you some tips on what I do with Ferrites, how it helped me. I have neighbors where I can literally hear them talking. So I'm very close to people behind me, in front of me, and every time they turn on an LED light, I know. When their washing machine is on the spin cycle, I know. I can tell on my waterfall exactly what's going on in my neighborhood. So I'm trying to at least control my local noise. Yeah, let's see here. Okay, here we go. So here's one section that I wrote about in my book, and this is personal preference, but here's what I'm finding. So the default settings on WSJTX, I find them to be a little bit slow and too wide. And let me explain what that means. It's obviously it's sometimes hard to find a clear spot, but especially if the waterfall is going at a slow rate and you're trying to jump into a clear spot, and I've done this myself, where it's a little hard to find that spot if the waterfall is not fast enough. You're going to be delaying like 10 seconds sometimes before you're like, okay, that's a clear spot. You jump in, you miss a whole cycle. So what I do is I speed it up, and the settings I do is I set the bins pixels to 4 and the average to 1. And what that does, and I also flatten it. I don't know if that's default or not. But what that basically does, it narrows down the waterfall. So for one, I can fit the whole, 3000 hertz plus a window in it, and I'll show you what it looks like in a minute, full sized. And also, I get a much better rhythm and feel for where everybody is, what's a clear spot, what's not, and faster. So that's one thing that I find really helps me. The rest you can adjust to your personal liking. Some people change the colors, some people change, different things on the waterfall. Those are the only two things I change. And I run a 4K monitor. Actually, I run actually three 4K monitors, but on a 4K monitor, even it's pretty hard to get multiple WSJTXs running side by side. So that's what I do. And this is basically what I see on my second screen, which will be on my right now. I usually monitor two bands. Uh, this I just added this actually because I replaced it with a better picture. But during the day, one of the on the left side, I run whatever band I'm mostly operating on, and I'm monitoring 6 meters on the right side. And then when the sun goes down or close to that, I switch to 160 meters on the right side. So I'm always watching 6 and 160 on one side, and the left side is operating. And these are on different receivers. It's a flex radio. So essentially, with this, and I'll talk about the bottom, the below the waterfall is JT alert, and I'm running two instances of WSJTX with the waterfall narrowed down to 3 kilohertz with my settings, and two um, WSJTX. I'm sorry, two JT alerts below that, and I still have room for my surveillance cameras on the right. This is just a little screen capture of what I see. There are times when I run more than that, and I have been known to run up to four. Like I monitor, let's say, 20 meters FT8, and on the second window FT4. And then while I'm still monitoring 6 meters for openings in a different window, and then possibly some other random thing. So you can actually run multiple ones. If you're running one, you're probably okay on real estate is what I'm trying to say. But it really helps me to have this compact view. So I also do a couple of strange things, and well, strange, maybe not, is I monitor a little bit outside of the 3 kilohertz window. And I recommend that within reason, but also I also noticed that some people have, and this is from when I was Elmering, some people set up their radios in reading mode, and they're either monitoring the lower half of the 3 kilohertz at 1.5 or the upper half. And I know more people do this than you think because several times I heard stations calling, and I answer on the opposite side, let's say at 2000, and nothing. And sometimes I'll say, okay, well, this is weird. So I keep throwing more wattage at them. Nothing. And then I move down to where they are, and all of a sudden they come back to me like with a plus 14 report. So what that says to me is they're not hearing me. So and I always think back to when I was helping some folks set up their radios, and they set it up to like reading mode, for example, and they really are missing half the available 3 kilohertz to us, and I think part of the reason is because of the default waterfall settings. They see that first part of the spectrum, the other half is kind of enlarged, and most people don't bother to expand it. So it might have something to do with that. So what I do is I actually often expand to 4 to 6 kilohertz, and the reason is quite often I find some real gems in there um, above the 3 kilohertz. Sometimes rare DX doesn't want to be too bothered, comes up. I've gotten several good fillers doing this. And again, like I mentioned here, sometimes some stations are deaf to certain parts of the spectrum. So, or maybe they're covered by a local station or their filter is narrow. So, something to be aware of. And you probably noticed the little overlay I had on my Flex radio with the spotting network. So since I always get asked those, I guess in this group nobody has a Flex, but I'll tell you anyway if you ever get one. It's called Stax 3, and it overlays over the waterfall, and essentially I'm pulling spots from actually four different sources, and it puts it right on the waterfall. I can double click it, takes me right there. It's almost like cheating, so my apologies, but it works very well. So I just, in case somebody's curious, if you ever install it though, this program does have a tendency to give a false positive virus alert on Norton and also on Malwarebytes. It's perfectly fine. It's just the way that it works. It does kind of have a signature that's similar to how a virus works, so it gets flagged. So that's that side note. Now the alternatives. So I'm kind of curious. Well, actually, you're muted, so I'm not going to ask. But a lot of people use JTDX. I go back and forth. There's also MSHV, which is the multi-stream version. There's WSJTX Enhanced, which is, I don't know if anybody's used it yet. It's kind of slick, has nice band switching and so on. And there is the Z edition, which is actually, well, I'll talk about it in a little bit, but these are basically all based off of the original WSJTX. Now, a lot of people play around with these different versions, and some swear that they're better than others. Now, are they? Answer is they're all better and none are better. So that's probably clear as mud. So let me explain that. So I actually run. I have multiple times now tested this during D expeditions and just and I'm on 160 meters and 10 meters, so that way I get both a noisy environment and a less noisy environment to see what runs better. And sometimes JTDX decodes a little better, sometimes WSJTX decodes a little better. So what I do now is if it's something rare that I really need, I run both. And occasionally I can run Fox and Hound, for example, on my WSJTX, and I'll have JTDX running on the side monitoring. And once in a while, it doesn't actually decode on WSJTX. Then I'll manually trigger the response if I see that I got called back on JTDX. Works like a charm, so I don't miss my um, spot. Now, the other way around is a little problematic, but essentially, it's a real toss-up. I've tried it now multiple times. I would say maybe in a high noise environment like 80 meters, 160 meters, maybe like by this much JTDX wins, but it's really a toss-up. So basically, use what you like. Play around with all of them. The enhanced version is actually pretty slick. That I did not cover in the book because that came out since, but I thought I mentioned it here, so you're getting a little bonus here. So that was not in there, but that's something worth checking out. And diversity reception is also good, but diversity reception means that you're using two antennas, different antennas, and two receivers, and it's kind of listening and combining the signals to essentially try and figure out, um, essentially reassemble it. But it can also cancel out signals. So you have to be kind of careful with it. It's a little it's not for the faint of heart, let's leave it at that. But it's interesting to experiment with. And of course there's Super Fox mode now, which is new, so that also wasn't covered in the book. So but yeah, bottom line, none of them are perfect. None are, in my opinion, this is again my opinion, none are better than the other. But use them together, and sometimes you get decodes on one and not the other, and vice versa. So if you really need something and it's just borderline receivable, use both. You don't have to set up the second one for full transmit. Just pipe in the audio from the same source and just have it listen. That's all you need to do. And use the one that you prefer. So add-ons. So JT Alert, and I covered this in the book quite a bit, is by far, I think, the most handy plugin. In fact, I think for DXers, I almost think that it's a must. And the reason is it makes you more efficient. You'll get a feel for what fillers you need. You don't work dupes. I have a few DXers in my area. I'm not going to say call signs, don't worry. But I see them working the same DX over and over and over again. And I even know from watching them that they already worked it. And they don't use JT Alert. And I see them calling sometimes for half an hour, something that I remember they worked 2 weeks ago. So I don't know if they're just really bored, maybe. But essentially, this helps you avoid that because it kind of says, okay, it doesn't show up in that list on the bottom. And it says, okay, you already worked it, you don't need it. And also has checkboxes when you plug in it ties into your logbook. So it has little checkboxes and tells you right away if, you worked it on that band, little checkboxes on what bands you worked the station at. So, you don't waste your time working something you don't need. And you can do filters for whatever you're interested in. What I do is I color code things, and by default they're color coded, but I change them a little bit for myself. If it's a one at DXCC, now I see less and less of that. Unfortunately, it's getting now once you get over 300, as you guys know, it gets pretty hard to find new ones. I'm sure everybody has that, but like if you participate in the CQ marathon, or if you started doing things like I started hunting Canadian provinces now, that's a good one. If you're missing grids, one of the things I do is I always look for rare prefixes, the WPX award. This is great. Everything that's a rare prefix for me jumps out in blue. It color codes it for me. So I know right away, like, oh, that's a prefix I need or I'm missing. So you can do some pretty slick things with it. Now it also has a chat feature. I don't know how many used it here, but it has a chat feature where okay, it's a little controversial. I feel some people abuse it a little bit. And in fact, I see stations calling me sometimes, and I get a little chat alert from them if they see that I'm on and saying, "I'm calling you, you're minus 16." Well, that's not really an exchange on the radio. That's, you're texting me essentially. So, so I kind of respond like, "Okay, I'll look for your, I'm not gonna take their signal report through JT alert, but sometimes, especially Europeans in the morning like to do that. I noticed, and but it is also nice, and here's where I use it. Once in a while, I see a station that's on. I complete the QSO, but maybe I missed the 73 on the end. And I'll send them a message here, like, I got you in the log. I sent you a 73, just want to make sure I'm in the log. And then 9 out of 10 times they come back to me like, yep, I got you. You're in the log. So that then I can move on. Or sometimes they say, no, I didn't get your 73. So then I'll send it a few more times and we'll complete the queue. So I think that's fine. But I've seen stations try and use it as a signal report exchange, which I think is a little sketchy. Like, that's so like I said, it can be misused like any tool. People will try and find ways. This add-on also assists with logging, a lot of automation in it. And I use it, but honestly, I only use about half the features because it's so much in there. If you're interested in checking it out, it's hamapps.com. And there's a little bit of learning curve. It's not terribly difficult, but I think once you get it set up to your liking and learn a little bit about it, it will save you a tremendous amount of time. And just working what you need, getting alerted. There is even a voice plugin that you can plug in if you walk away from your radio. And if a wanted DXCC entity or a wanted whatever comes up, it will talk to you and say, "You DXCC entity." Usually that's when I run back into my office and like, "Oh, where? What is it?" But you have to be careful not to have it on for everything because it will pretty much talk nonstop. So adjust it to your liking if you decide to use it. It's a really nice tool. There's a support group where you can learn about it more, and that's at HAMAPS groups. And here's a couple of tips that I mentioned in the book. And I kind of wish everyone would do this because it would help us all. So and this is in two different things. So on JT Alert, there is a area where you can enable reporting back to hem spots. And in WSJTX, there's an area where you can check a little box that says enable PSK reporting or PSK reporter spotting. And the reason I recommend that is because if we're all doing that, we'll have a much better picture of how propagation is. Like, for example, I look for people in my area, where people down in San Jose, let's say, which is about an hour from me, south. If I see them, or I hear them working somebody, I'll look and see, okay, like they're receiving the station. How strong is it in their neck of the woods, or are they really hearing it? Because, like I mentioned here, once in a while, there are some known stations around me who see. Let's say the other day I saw, well, a couple of weeks ago, I saw, I think it was a Nepalese station, and people started calling it, and I said, "That's interesting. I don't hear it." And next thing I know, I went on PSK Reporter and I checked, and I said, "That's interesting because the person calling it is hearing a bunch of things, but they also don't hear it." They were calling blindly, so I don't know what kind of miracle they were expecting because they would never know if the station came back to them. So I always wonder about people who call stations they can't hear, but once in a while you see that. Anyways, HemSpots and the PSK Reporter, and let me show you what they look like. If you haven't used it, some of you I'm assuming have. This is PSK Reporter, for example, and this is I believe this blue is 40 meters, so it tells me I'm transmitting. and it tells me where I was heard how long ago. And this is FT8. And I can hover over any of those little bubbles that have the minutes on it, and it will tell me how strong I was, which also tells me, am I running too much power, too little power, et cetera, et cetera. So, and this was probably like 100 watts or 200 watts here. And this I find very helpful in finding out like which way I should rotate, what is it that maybe I should be on the lookout for. So, and if more and more people report back, um, essentially the bubbles that you see with the minutes are the people who enabled this reporting in WSJTX. So without this, and I have it enabled. So if you ever want to look me up to see if I can hear you, I'm sure I can, being not that far. Um, Very easy to get an image like this. Now, on the flip side, HemSpots looks like this. And this is what JT Alerts reports back to. On the left side are calls that I spotted, meaning things I received on my JT WSJTX or well, whichever flavor I'm using, doesn't really matter. It works with any flavor really. And on the right side, it shows me who heard me. So this is more of a list representation and kind of helpful to see who's hearing you and who you're hearing. And this refreshes every cycle essentially. And these are really nice tools to see. Sometimes I'd be calling, like the Middle East is kind of hard for me because of where I'm located, for example. And sometimes I'd be calling Saudi Arabia or Qatar or someplace. And those guys, honestly, I don't like to do that, but I have to give them, 800 watts sometimes. And I barely get a minus 24 back. But I can tell if they're copying me here, if they're reporting back, even though they're not coming back to me, I can see whether they actually hear me or not. So if I have a chance, or should I just go get another cup of coffee? Because don't even bother. So really helpful. Grid tracker. So I don't know if anyone's used this. This is more if you're hunting grids, and this is great for people who are into 6 meters, for example. But others use it too. It's also used for satellite work. That's how I discovered it. And this essentially tells you what you worked, what you confirmed. This is not mine. This is just a screenshot. But essentially, it can also work live, and it can work from your logs. So this is a really handy tool that a lot of people like. 6 meter guys and satellite guys sometimes live on this. Here's a little bonus tip. Um, and this I cover in the book, and this is one thing that I probably have gotten more questions about than anything else combined, and I'm not even kidding. And the reason for this is because a lot of people run special event stations, and they don't want to reconfigure everything, but they want to use their WSJTX the way it's set up. And in my case, I use it because I run multiple what they call slices on the Flex radio. I also run WSJTX on VHF, UHF. I know some of you don't like those words, but I do run VHF, UHF. And I also run FT8 on satellite. The RS-44 satellite actually does FT8 activity. So I have quite a few different profiles set up for that. And the way that you do that is essentially you edit the shortcut. When you have a shortcut to the WSJTX EXE, make a copy, rename it, and put the rig name in there. Give it any name. Doesn't have to be anything weird. Just make sure you remember it. So for me, I call them slice A, slice B. If you have a second rig, call it, like whatever radio you have, Elecraft. I have one called, as you can see on the bottom, I have one called ICOM. That's the one I use from my ICOM 9700. So when I do FT8 on 2 meters during VHF contest, which actually you'd be surprised how much FT8 activity there's on 2 meters during VHF contest in the summer, or on satellite, I use the same install. I just start that up, and it's configured for that radio, that sound card, and usually defaults to the default frequency. So in that case, 2 meters, but that's irrelevant. It's easy to change. But so you can have multiple radios with multiple cat controls, multiple sound cards. And I don't know if there's a limit, but I have probably about 12 configured like that. And I just start up whatever I happen to be doing that day. I have some set up for my 905, ICOM 905, a couple of different ones for different purposes for the 9700, and I have four set up for the Flex. And if you ever run a special event station, you can just rename your current profile with the same audio card and cat controls, and then start a different rig name and put in the grid, like if you're a rover station, put in your grid or the special event call, and then you don't mess up your regular settings, if you will. So this is, like I said, I get a lot of emails about this and questions. It's actually pretty simple, and 9 out of 10 times people forget that second dash before rig. It's two lines. They say, "Hey, I copied this and it doesn't work. You lied to us." So then I go in and be like, "Okay, did you use two dashes?" They're like, "Oh, never mind, it works." So two dashes. It's a little hard to see. I don't know if you can see it okay, but yeah. So that's I don't know. This was something that I'm not even kidding. I get a lot of questions about how to do that. Okay. Okay, the wonderful world of ferrites and not ferrets. People sometimes say it wrong. Um, so this is actually part of my collection. I literally have a drawer full of different ferrites, and not to mention the ones I have invested in behind all my radio gear. I I mean, I probably spent as much on ferrites as radios, and I'm not even kidding. They're not cheap. Some of them go up in price quite a bit. Are they worth it? Around here, yes. I'm in California, as you know. And so we got solar panels, Tesla chargers, people growing certain herbal things in my neighborhood. And it's going on YouTube, so I'm not gonna say what. And so there's ballasts and those bulbs. They make a lot of noise, and so this is not gonna fix that per se, but all of it at least. But I'm gonna try and minimize the noise, and there's some things I cannot control. But anyways, I use these on everything, including our washer and dryer, because I jokingly mentioned that I hear my neighbor's cycle, a washer cycle. I actually do, but I don't hear ours anymore because I put a couple of big ferrites on our cord, which acts like an antenna. So multiple turns are used for best results. And I literally went around and I with an AM radio and I got near things and there's also some things you can buy from MSJ. So um, if they're still floating around and if you find these noise detecting, I mentioned the part numbers in my book from MFJ, since MFJ is gone out of business, snap them up before they disappear. But an old AM radio works fine. And just go around them when you get near something and you hear a lot of buzzing, put a ferrite on it. And if it buzzes really loud, put two. And believe me, it really cleans up your waterfall. Now, they're not all the same. So the ones that you really want, and wallwarts are the is the slang. I don't know if everybody knows this. Is those AC to DC converters, the switching power supplies you plug in the wall. And 31 and 75 are the most common. A lot of computers actually come with some ferrites already on them because they know that their switching power supplies are pretty loud. I'm finding they're not actually sufficient enough, so I usually put on extras. And you can also buy USB cables, by the way, with ferrites on them, and they actually work pretty well. A lot of audio folks buy those when they have audio recording going on and they can't have hum coming through and etc. They're really great for ham radio too. You can pick them up on Amazon actually for a couple of bucks. They're worth it. I replaced all my USB cables with things with ferrites, or I put ferrites on it myself. Um, Also, 77 is good for noise suppression. The lower bands, you want to go to 7.5. There's a bunch of different ones, but really only about 4 or 5 different numbers that are good for what we do, which is radio. And if you can loop it through multiple times, that's even better because it actually really improves. Actually it's better to loop it through than to put two. believe it or not, mathematically. And it's kind of weird, but it actually works out. Now, if you put two and you loop it through, you'll really choke that noise. I mean, it works amazingly. Now, here's the guy who's responsible for me almost having to refinance my house with all the ferrite purchasing that I've done, and that's Jim K9YC. He lives near me actually, and I heard him speak a few times. And honestly, he kind of got me started in cleaning up my noise. I started out with a Yaesu the Yaesu radio. I actually, before I went to Flex, I had about probably 5 or 6 different Yaesu radios, and I liked them quite a bit. And I noticed there was a lot of noise. Certain when I turned on my overhead lights, waterfall jumped. I was monitoring with an SDR on the side, and so I started. That's when I really started playing with ferrites, and all of a sudden I was hearing things I never heard before. So it's kind of amazing. So anyway, on his website there is an excellent article about this. The QRM Guru has article on ferrites. That's also worth reading. They are great. There's a lot of good YouTube videos out there, and I also been kind of thinking about making one myself on ferrites because that's another thing that comes up a lot. That's actually one of the reasons I picked this as a topic to kind of go over briefly. A lot of people in urban areas like San Francisco, there's actually a surprising number of DXers in San Francisco, believe it or not, but they deal with noise from their neighbors, and usually they're at arm's length. So now obviously you have less control over your neighbors, but if you can at least reduce your local noise, that helps. And here's a little trick that I wish I'd figured out sooner. Um, I started labeling my ferrites because I started buying some ferrites. Then I threw them in a box or I put them on cables and I said, oh my God, was that a 31? Was that a 46? They all look the same. They don't label them. That'd be too easy, right? So I figured out that if you use a silver Sharpie or one of those, they sell these pens for artists. You can pick them up in a dollar store, like a 2-pack. They come in gold or silver color that you can write on black, and it's permanent marker. Really good way to keep track of what your ferrites are. And I really wish that was a standard that like some color codes or something like on resistors, but nope, like I said, that'd be too easy. So in the meantime, until they figure it out, Sharpie, silver Sharpie works great. I always mark them, and when I go back 2, 3, 5 years later, then I'm like, okay, that's what I did here. So just a little tip. So key thing to remember is 31. If you're not sure, buy a 31. And that kind of covers you. Polymer engineering is a really good source. Hempfest is another one, and sometimes they show up. And Amidon is another one. DigiKey, I ordered things from DigiKey. And Kits and Parts actually has a few on and off. Sometimes they sell out, but be careful with flea markets because you don't really know what they are. Sometimes they buy things in bulk. Uh, Temu, I don't know if anybody's used that. It's one of those online retailer apps. Basically, a bunch of Chinese imports at a really good price. And sometimes there's a really good reason that they're at a really good price. Because I don't even know if they're really ferrites. I mean, there's some things that you can buy unbelievably cheap. So be careful because you might be wasting your money. eBay, with exceptions, there's also a lot of weird things that you find there unless you're sure you know what you're getting. Those are I would not recommend those places. But DX Engineering also has a limited number, but they have a few like some jokes and things. But those are probably your best places. Those are guys that kind of specialize in them more. And Palomar actually has kits specifically for your radio. You go in and say, "Hey, I have a you know a K3," and they'll sell you the whole kit, like the correct diameter, everything for all your average connections, for example. That's where I would start if you were to experiment with that. So, anyways, yeah, well, this is where I can take questions, comments, complaints. If you need to reach me, simple, Lucas at w6ar.com. Website, Vitamin DX is the publishing company. Yes, I do have a YouTube channel. That's at Maximum RF, and that is a ham radio channel. And I'm hoping to get that a lot more active. I want to have a life outside of radio, so it's a little hard to write books and run a YouTube channel and everything else. I need to retire. That's the key. Just need to retire.